So hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, the 28th of August, 2025. Today is day 692. It's a weekly update from what's happened in the Middle East, particularly in Gaza over the past week. And one of the things I said in my devotion on Sunday is that I've been emotionally absent. I think I just froze. Maybe you can still hear me, but give me a moment to collect myself. The news has just been so bad. It's been so bad every day, every day, every day. And this week is no different. And so I gave a devotion on Sunday talking about what's it mean to be present in this time. And I think some of what it means to be present is just continuing to talk about how bad it is. And so the reality is, in the past week or so, a famine has officially been declared in Gaza. People are starving. And while news is reporting the increase of assistance that's being allowed into the Gaza Strip, the systemic issues are not being addressed. And so I'll talk about how food is not how you solve a famine. Food actually, once people get to phase 5 on the categorization system of acute hunger, food doesn't help. And so there are actually mechanisms and systems and humanitarian assistance beyond food that has to be, it's a regimen that has to bring people back from starvation. And that is not being done in the Gaza Strip right now. And so there's this disconnect where the news either is not reporting what's happening or you hear things like there's increased food, but then the food's not allowed to be distributed. And so the devil is in the details. And that's part of why we do these daily updates. So Israel's foreign ministry just today asked for the integrated food security phase classification. This is the international classification system. It's called the IPC. It's asking them to retract their assessment that has found famine in Gaza City. So the famine is in the north of Gaza. So this was a message from Israel to the Global Hunger Monitor. The Ministry of Israel alleged the report is deeply flawed, unprofessional, gravely missing the standards expected from an international body. And they're threatening to urge IPC donors to withhold funding if the report is not retracted. The health ministry yesterday said 10 more people died from hunger in the 24 hours preceding yesterday's announcement. And so I went into great detail earlier this week about some of the details of famine and hunger. But the bottom line is this Global Hunger Monitor, IPC, confirmed famine is in North Gaza. It's predicted to spread to other population centers throughout the entire enclave in coming weeks, to the point to where by the end of September, it's thought that 30% of the population of Gaza will be experiencing famine and acute hunger. That number is 641,000 people, a third of the entire population by the end of September. So we attended a briefing last week on Friday about the conditions of famine, and I went in great detail in my daily update about this, but I just wanted to summarize a couple of things. 54% of the population in the Gaza governorate in the north are experiencing extreme hunger or emergency hunger. Famine, as I mentioned, is expected to reach a third of the population by the end of September. That's that fifth category. In past updates, I've gone through the 5 categories of the IPC. Fifth is the highest, it's catastrophic, and it means death is imminent if there is not an acute intervention. This is the first time famine has officially been confirmed in the Middle East region. If you want to hear more of those details, it was Saturday that I gave the details of the update about the famine in Gaza. There also, this past week, was a major bombing of a hospital. Now, this happens on a regular basis. Why was this a big deal? It was a big deal because 19 people were killed. And this was one of the first times there's been an international response. Now, there's been an international response in terms of media, in terms of condemning the attacks, but there's still no accountability. There's still not significant actions being taken to address the problem. We're not hearing a lot of conversation about sanctions from Europe or sanctions about weapons. It's like the global community is talking about it, saying this is so urgent, we have to do something, and no one is doing anything. So the strike happened on Monday. It was Han Yunis Nasser Hospital. 19 people were killed. Initially, reports said 4 journalists. It was 5 journalists. One of the journalists, several of the journalists were from the Associated Press, Reuters, and Al Jazeera. One of the journalists was an AP freelancer whose name was Miriam Daga. She was 33 years old. She was killed on Monday in this attack. And the agency said they were shocked and saddened by her death. She's a mother of a 13-year-old son. They were evacuated from Gaza earlier in the conflict. She reported regularly from Nasser Hospital. She covered the staff's efforts to care for children, the extreme conditions there. She also contributed to other Arabic outlets. But in one of her final social media posts that was on Sunday, she shared a selfie of herself capturing the commitment to frontline reporting. And she said, "We're doing everything we can to keep our journalists in Gaza safe as they continue to provide crucial eyewitnesses reporting in difficult and dangerous conditions." So the Associated Press reported this. One of the things that's really critical to understand is Israel is not allowing international press into Gaza. So in terms of understanding what's happening, the only news we get is from agencies that are working on the ground or from reporters who are Gazan. And listen to these numbers. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 192 have been killed in Gaza in the last 22 months. So one of the things that happened that we'll talk about in international updates is, where is the international community of news saying that these are atrocities where the stories can't even be told? The story is being completely controlled by Israel because international journalists are not allowed in. And whether it's intentional or not, I won't judge that. 192 journalists have been killed in Gaza over the last 22 months. It's like, where is the world in the midst of this ongoing crisis? Commenting on that Israeli strike, Netanyahu said that Israel deeply regrets the tragic mishap that occurred. Now, this is significant. I mean, I think it's bullshit, but it's significant because it's the first time that he acknowledged, that they actually have attacked a hospital, which is against international law. The IDF said it ordered an inquiry. Here's one of the things that's also problematic with this attack. Not only was it on a hospital, which is against international law, it was what's called a double tap. At least that's what was initially reported. There's a small bomb that is for precision, and then a second bomb follows it. That is illegal according to international law. The IDF spokesperson following the strike said that the IDF does not intentionally target civilians, and they're conducting a thorough investigation. And forgive me for being crass, but talk is really cheap. And one of the things we're hearing is talk from politicians and talk from international leaders. And so if there's any lesson for us to be learned over the last 22 months, part of it is that what's being said and what's being done completely contradicts itself. So you can't listen to what people say. You have to listen to what they say and look at what they're doing. How many attacks have there been on hospitals in the last 22 months? So the IDF did order a probe into why tank shells were fired at the Gaza hospital, where 20 civilians were killed. The United Nations Human Rights Office said Israel's investigations into deaths in Gaza have to yield results. We have not seen results or accountability measures yet. The story that Israel is telling, this just came out in the last couple of days, is that the strike that was carried out on Nasser Hospital was in order to destroy an observation camera that was placed in the hospital by Hamas militants. But the military, according to the New York Times, the military did not provide evidence about the camera's presence. They did not provide evidence. Israel had said that 6 of the people killed were actually Palestinian militants. According to the New York Times, there was no evidence provided to that claim, and there was no explanation for why the first strike was followed by a second strike minutes later. Now, today it was just reported that actually there were 3 strikes. So there was a video that was obtained by CNN. The strikes killed at least 22 people, according to the numbers today. This included health workers, emergency response crews, and the 5 journalists. According to the CNN, the second and third strike were what caused the deaths. Some of the death tolls this week, on Tuesday, 75 people in Gaza died in a 24-hour period of time. 370 were injured. From those numbers on Tuesday, the total number of Palestinians killed in the last 22 months is at least 62,819. Those wounded is 158,629 in the Gaza Strip. Hunger-related deaths have now reached 303 people. Of those 303 who have died from malnutrition or hunger, that number includes 117 children. And one of the things, if you know about starvation and famine, it's a bell curve. So as the days go on, more and more people will continue to die if there's not acute intervention. On Saturday, there were reports that an Israeli soldier was killed in an explosion that involved an Israeli army device. So that would be this person was not killed by militants or by Hamas, but by an accident involving Israeli explosives. The churches in Gaza City, one of the questions has been there's an evacuation order now for the people on Gaza City because of the invasion of Gaza. And the question is, where are these people going to go? And so the churches in Gaza City, they have said shelter people. They're going to stay. They're going to stay in North Gaza. This is amid the operations in the city. There was a joint statement that was just put out by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Greek Orthodox, and the Latin Catholic Patriarch Pizzaballa and Theophilus. CMEP will be putting out that statement this week as well. On Monday, 58 people were killed, 308 were wounded. Just remember, anywhere else in the world, if 20 people are killed, we hear about it on the front page of the New York Times. And we're seeing these death tolls every single day. Other updates from Monday, the family of the kidnapped soldier, this was Nimrod Cohen. They released new video footage of when he was abducted on October 7th. I'll talk more about the hostages in a bit. Israeli forces did open fire on a crowd traveling through a military zone in South Gaza who were trying to reach the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food distribution point. 4 aid seekers were killed in that report this week. Israeli planes and tanks pounded buildings and homes on the eastern and northern outskirts of Gaza City. This was over the weekend. The Israeli Defense Minister Katz vowed to press on with an offensive in Gaza City. This is where famine has been confirmed. So Israel is taking over Gaza City. The people are being displaced, and there's no place for them to go. On Saturday, the health ministry in Gaza said 61 Palestinians were killed and 308 were wounded. In terms of ceasefire negotiations, Egypt has started providing security training to hundreds of Palestinians who are said to be a part of a force that could provide security for post-war Gaza. This is according to Arab officials. So these are Palestinian Authority security forces that are being trained by Egypt. I would imagine that the U.S. and others who are involved in the negotiations are a part of this. The U.S. in past times has said there could be a peacekeeping force. But Israel, if you remember, and I went through this in last week's weekly update, when the declaration was made by Netanyahu for the 5 points of what needs to be accomplished in the conquering of Gaza City, one of the points was not only no Hamas in Gaza, it was no PA in Gaza. So this is an example of what we're hearing and what's happening, again, contradicting itself. And, you know, depending on which voice you're listening from Israel, if it's Netanyahu or others in the regime, we hear very mixed messages. President Trump said on Monday that he claimed the war in Gaza could have a pretty good conclusive ending within the next 2 to 3 weeks. He said he talks to Netanyahu quite a bit. He told him that the war needs to end soon. I'll talk more about Trump's comments when I get to the U.S. The IDF's chief of staff, Zamir, reportedly said there's a deal on the table for the remaining hostages in Gaza and that the Israeli military had brought about these conditions. So the argument is the taking over of Gaza City is a requirement to put pressure on Hamas to negotiate. So that is the political maneuvering that's being communicated. Moving on to the occupied West Bank, which includes East Jerusalem, there are updates on the E1 settlement block. So this settlement block was just approved. This would be a new settlement that would be east of Jerusalem. It would be, I think, north of Ma'al Damim, one of the biggest settlements outside of Jerusalem. Our staff had meetings with the Israeli human rights organization Amim this past week, and we learned that there are appeals about this in the Israeli Supreme Court, one by Palestinian communities and a second by Israeli NGOs, which includes Amim and Bimcom. They're joined by several of the residents who are mostly Bedouin, who are going to be displaced. The significance of E1 is that it would completely cut the north and the south of the West Bank, what's supposed to be the future state of Palestine, what more than 100 countries around the world have acknowledged as the state of Palestine. It will cut it in half. So part of E1 would build a new highway through Lazaria. Lazaria, if you can hear, that sounds like Lazarus. This is the city of Lazarus. This is where his tomb is. This is Bethany. The plan for E1 is that there would be a road from Jerusalem. Lazaria is already on the Palestinian side of the separation barrier, and this road would cut this major Palestinian city that's already been cut off from Jerusalem in half once again. The road would essentially bisect it. Engineers have said they're hugely concerned about how this would affect the city. Since the plan's approval, initial reports indicate that there are at least 40 demolition orders in the city of Lazaria in the occupied West Bank. In Jerusalem, over the past 2 years, we've talked extensively about the Armenian community. I'd invite you, if you're in New York, we're doing a big event launching our Armenian Advisory Council in New York on September 16th. But the Armenian community in Jerusalem has been under threat, and there's been a lot of news about this illegal land deal. Someone within the Armenian Patriarchate said that they sold a parking lot that would become apartment buildings. It ends up that the company that was essentially a front for a Jewish settlement group, and so this has been contested over the last 2 years. There have been court cases. This is about the Cows Garden, or Guvru Bardeh is the name of the area, and Zana Gardens is the name of the company. So this would be a historic land deal. So recent reports have indicated that despite public outrage and a protest, there's been global protest. We've been talking about this extensively. We've had numerous statements about this. There's a second deal that has been struck between the Armenian Patriarchate and the Zana Gardens, which is so catastrophic. So this just broke. I'd encourage you to look at Save the Ark, ARQ, which is an Armenian organization that's trying to save the Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. The community has rejected these actions and emphasizes both the illegal nature of the situation and the precedent it sets. On Tuesday, Palestinians reported dozens wounded as the IDF troops have operated in Ramallah. This is also unheard of. IDF troops do not operate in Ramallah. Ramallah is the de facto capital of the Palestinian state. And so soldiers were in daytime operating in the center of the city. They raided a money changer's office in the center of the city, and the army said they transferred funds to Hamas operatives. The IDF rarely operates in Ramallah. This is a significant change of the reality. They said during the raid that dozens of Palestinians clashed with soldiers outside of the office, and troops sought to disperse them by using crowd control equipment, as well as what are called rubber bullets, which are illegal by international law. Tuesday, there were more reports about extreme settler violence. There were 7 people wounded in the West Bank by settlers who used armed clubs against not only Palestinians, but Israeli activists who were supporting the Palestinians in the West Bank. This was in the village of Kowawis in the South Hebron Hills. 7 people wounded, 4 had to be evacuated to hospitals. According to the Israeli activists who were attacked, settlers sprayed them with pepper spray, stole a phone and a camera from them, and broke solar panels, house windows, and car windows in the village. The activists said that the attack occurred as the settlers were grazing their sheep on private Palestinian lands. The police who were called to intervene failed to do so. They arrived on the scene, but according to activists, the attack was 20 minutes after the police left. Meanwhile, in Israel, this is quite significant news. In Israel, there was a day of disruption on Tuesday where there were demonstrations for hostages. This took place nationwide. The Hostage and Family Forum once again addressed President Trump, who, they responded to his whole saying in 2 to 3 weeks, this is going to be over. On the ground, there's very little indication that that's the case. They said, we pray this is true, and that you will follow through on the deadline to end our suffering. So tens of thousands of people marched in the hostages Tens of thousands and people marched in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. They called for an immediate end to the war. They're calling for the release of the hostages, but not only the release of the hostages, they're calling for an end to the war in Gaza. One of the mothers of a woman who was killed, whose body is still being held captive by Hamas, said, "We're shouting to the prime minister, listen to the nation. The nation demands a comprehensive deal." This was a piece about the news that I wanted to call to your attention about the lack of international reporters being allowed in Gaza. This last week, the executive editor of the Associated Press, this is a huge deal, Julia Pace, and the Reuters editor-in-chief, Galani, wrote to Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Force leaders demanding a clear explanation for Israel's killing of the 5 journalists in that hospital strike. They said, "We're outraged that independent journalists are among the victims of the strike in the hospital, a location that's protected under international law, and that the IDF's actions raise serious questions, including whether Israel is deliberately targeting live feeds in order to suppress information." I'm going to shift and just do a couple of updates before I close on the broader Middle East. There's been a lot of conversation about Iran, concerns from the local community in Arab states that Israel might once again attack Iran because of the increased international pressure on Gaza. But Iran has said it remains committed to diplomacy. There was a European meeting between Iran and EU states about this nuclear dispute. They're saying they're still committed. The meeting was to discuss European demands that Iran restore access to the UN nuclear sites, that Iran allow nuclear inspectors in to revive diplomacy on a deal or face the reimposition of sanctions that were lifted under the 2015 accord. Now, Britain, France, and Germany are planning to notify jointly the UN Security Council that Iran is in significant violation of that 2015 agreement and that they're reinstating international sanctions on Iran. I'll talk more about that in the days ahead. But Iranian officials yesterday confirmed, or earlier this week, that the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors have supervised the changing of fuel at their nuclear power plant at Bushehr for the first time since the country suspended cooperation from that nuclear watchdog. Now, there was a lot of talk this week about how Germany and the UK and France couldn't agree on what measures Iran should take to be back in compliance. And so there'll be a lot on that in coming weeks. Related to Lebanon, the huge conversation in Lebanon, there's currently a tentative ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. My understanding is Israel continues to be in the south of Lebanon in violation of that ceasefire agreement. I don't know if Hezbollah is north of the Litani River, which was their agreement according to that accord. But Lebanon's government this week has presented a plan on how to get Hezbollah to disarm. So the U.S. has negotiated a deal with Lebanon. One of the key players is the special envoy for Syria, Tom Barak. He's been at the center of this from the U.S. He has said that, there's an agreement about the disarmament of Hezbollah. But there was a lot of hoopla in the news this week because Barak was giving a presentation related to this issue, and he said that Lebanese journalists have to act civilized and not be animalistic. And so there was a lot of attention paid to his comments, not to actually the content of the deal. It said Israeli forces could begin withdrawing from South Lebanon if Hezbollah is disarmed, and Lebanon is supposed to propose this plan on how this is going to happen. So that's a big deal. On Monday, the Hezbollah chief, Naim Qassem, said that Israel may occupy Lebanese territory, but the group will continue to confront it to prevent it from settling and achieving its goals. Related to Syria, there was a lot happening in Syria this week. 6 Syrian soldiers in the Damascus countryside were killed by an Israeli drone strike. Defense Minister Israel Katz said that the IDF would remain at the summit of Mount Hermon in the demilitarized zone, which is necessary to protect the Golan and Galilee communities. Israel intends to protect the Druze in Syria as well. So this is that whole issue in South Lebanon, where there are Druze that support Israel. There are Druze that are a part of the Syrian state, and there have been clashes over past weeks and months. Syrian state television did report that a civilian was killed by the IDF this week in Syria. Syria's first post-Assad parliamentary election is going to happen. It's scheduled for September. And there's not been a lot about Yemen this week, but there was a strike where Israel struck the Yemeni capital Sana'a in retaliation for Houthi rebels firing missiles towards Israel. 6 people were killed and 86 were wounded in that attack that happened over the weekend. International responses, the UN is saying the famine is a man-made crisis. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, presented Trump with ideas for a post-war plan for Gaza. This was the meeting that happened at the White House this last week. I'll talk more about the US in a minute. And then there was also a letter from Macron, the French president, to Netanyahu this week that argued that France's call for the creation of a Palestinian state is anti-Semitic. So Macron responded and said it's not anti-Semitic. And so there was this whole issue about the European states, particularly France, that are planning on acknowledging a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September. Germany is not going to join that initiative. Germany will not recognize a Palestinian state at next month's UN General Assembly. So US updates, President Trump did chair this meeting at the White House. That was with Tony Blair. That was with Jared Kushner about a possible plan to solve I've not heard much about that at all. So we'll talk about that a lot in the days ahead. And then I was going to go through some of Trump's comments about the war ending in 2 to 3 weeks. He said, it looks like we're going to have a conclusive ending. He said it has to end. People can't forget October 7th. He said, it has to get over with because of the hunger and all the other problems, worse than the hunger, pure death, and people are getting killed. He said, I'm the one that brought back the hostages. When he was asked about the famine, he said, we're sending a lot of food to people in Gaza. And again, I would say famine and food is not what you need. If there's a famine, you have to have complete holistic humanitarian assistance and a very aloborate and acute intervention, which is not just about sending food. People who are starving and are in category 5 can't have food. But alongside Trump, Secretary of State Rubio said, we want it to end. It has to end with no Hamas. Now, Trump also said that the 20 hostages who are believed to still be alive, that he believes some of those have died. Israel has not given proof to that. So we don't know how many hostages are still living out of the 50 who remain in the Gaza Strip. Other significant news in the U.S., the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, met this last week in Chicago. They rejected a resolution to suspend U.S. military aid to Israel. Now, this is very controversial because half of the U.S. senators voted in favor of restricting offensive military aid to Israel because of what's happening in Gaza, but the DNC essentially voted that down. I can give more details about that in tomorrow's update. Senator Van Hollen from Maryland, Democrat, was in Israel this week. There was a lot of news about his statements in that regard. And I'll just close with a quick update about Christians from the Middle East. I talked about how the churches are going to stay in North Gaza. You'll see this week, if you follow CMEP's work, the Latin and Greek patriarchs released a statement on Tuesday calling for peace in Gaza. The next day, His Holiness Pope Francis joined them and said, I renew the strong appeal to both parties involved and to the international community. Put an end to this conflict in the Holy Land, which has caused so much terror, so much destruction, and so much death. I also talked a lot this week about the Arnona tax, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, and some of the other churches in Jerusalem. Their bank accounts have been put on hold. I'd encourage you to listen to that update if you're interested. I gave it in detail on one of the days this past week. And finally, Patriarch Pizzaballa, Catholic Patriarch, the Cardinal Pizzaballa, said that hearts can change even in the Holy Land. This was ahead of a day of prayer and fasting that was called by Pope Leo on August 22nd. He said that the power of prayer, we have to use it to open people to trust and to seek to do good, that this is possible, where we must find common ground where it seems like it's impossible. And Wednesday, the Pope invited the faithful around the world to implore the Lord to grant peace and justice to those who suffer because of armed conflicts, specifically in the Holy Land and in Ukraine. So that's an update from the past week. May God go before us. In the name of Christ. Amen.